elsewhere, but Sunday in the south and the far north looking brighter compared with Saturday.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it is 6 p.m. This is Dewbs Co with me, Emily Carver. So coming up on the show tonight, the triple by-election. What have we learned? The Tories hung on in Uxbridge, didn't they? Due to the visceral hatred of Sadiq Khan's ULEZ charges. So it got me thinking, should the Tories take stock of this result and scrap their own anti-motorist, anti-car green agenda? We also saw the 25-year-old Labour candidate storm to victory in Selby and Ainsty. But is 25 just a little bit too young to hold such a position. And King Charles is going to get a 45% increase in his royal stipend by 2025. Is the monarch ripping us off a bit? Or does our royal family deserve all they get? We'll be debating that. And how much has your rent gone up by? Get in touch, because over the past 4 years, rents have increased by 33%. And that's outside of London. It's absolutely mad. Let me know if yours has gone up too. And did you know that teenagers' main source of news is now TikTok, the video-sharing social media platform owned by the Chinese? Should we be alarmed? All of that to come tonight on Dewbs Co with me, Emily Carver. But first, let's get the latest news with Rory.
Thank you very much, Emily. Well, despite a double by-election loss for the Conservatives, the Prime Minister says a victory in Uxbridge and South Ruislip shows the next general election is not a done deal. Labour won Selby and Ainsley, whilst the Liberal Democrats took Somerton and Frome. Both are overturning majorities of about 20,000. Mr Sunak says the defeats were far from favourable, but he plans to double down and deliver for the people.
Westminster's been acting like the next election's a done deal. The Labour Party's been acting like it's a done deal. The people of Uxbridge just told all of them that it's not. Look, mid-term by-elections are rarely easy for incumbent governments. These are no different. And look, the reality is the circumstances of these by-elections are far from favourable. It's a reminder to politicians that we need to focus on what matters to people and not be distracted by what's going on in Westminster.
But Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says people want to see change.
You voted for change. You put your trust in the Labour Party. And we hear you. We hear that cry for change, away from the chaos, away from those rising bills, the crumbling public services, a cry for change. And we will deliver. We will deliver through Keir Mather here, and we'll deliver with the next Labour government.
And the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, says the support for his party has strengthened.
Previously, I've been talking about the Blue Wall in places like Hertfordshire, Oxfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Buckinghamshire, Bedfordshire, Surrey and Sussex, all those true blue heartlands, if you like, the home counties, where it's now the Liberal Democrats really challenging the Conservatives. Now we have a second front in the West Country, our traditional heartlands, if you like, the Liberal traditional heartlands. That means that we are a force to be reckoned with in the next general election.
Well, in other news this evening, a trial date has been set for former US President Donald Trump in his classified files case. According to court documents, it will take place on the 20th of May next year. The criminal trial will come less than 6 months ahead of the November 2024 US presidential election. Trump is the current frontrunner for the Republican nomination in the race. Boris Johnson will hand over messages from his own mobile phone to the COVID-19 inquiry. It's after technical experts managed to recover them. The former Prime Minister was initially told to stop using the phone in 2021 after his number was leaked online. He then reportedly forgot the passcode. But a spokesman says Boris Johnson is pleased the messages have been recovered. Legendary American jazz singer Tony Bennett has died at the age of 96. He released more than 70 albums over his 7-decade career and was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1994. He sold millions of records around the world, winning 20 Grammy Awards. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2016 and died in his hometown of New York. Around 3,000 asylum seekers will be housed in non-hotel sites by the autumn. The alternative locations include the Bibby Stockholm Barge in Dorset and former military sites in Essex and Lincolnshire. The Home Office denies that the use of barges are so-called floating prisons and says the people on board would be free to come and go as they wish. It's part of the government's plan to reduce the use of hotels and housing migrants, which costs taxpayers £6 million a day. Strikes that were set for next week on the London Underground have been called off. The union said progress has been made in talks on pensions and working conditions, although negotiations are still ongoing with ACAS as they attempt to come to a resolution. London's Mayor Sadiq Khan has thanked the RMT, ASLEF and Unite Union, who worked closely with Transport for London. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has sacked his country's ambassador to the UK. Vadim Vrashchenko was reportedly dismissed after publicly criticising the president's response to a row over gratitude for British military aid. Earlier this month, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said the UK and US were not Amazon when it came to Kyiv's requests for weapons and military equipment. Kyiv gave no official reason for the dismissal. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now though, back to Emily.
Welcome to Dewbs Co with me, Emily Carver. So joining me this evening until 7 is my wonderful panel, Communications Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Reem Ibrahim, and we have writer, broadcaster and firefighter, Paul Embry. Thank you very much indeed for joining me on the panel this evening. Now you can get in touch at home with us about all of the topics we're going to be discussing. GB Views at GBNews.com or on Twitter, of course, at GB News. So let's get stuck into our first topic of the evening. Now, a lucky few of us went out to vote yesterday. What a treat it always is to exercise our democracy. The constituencies of Uxbridge and Ruislip, Selby and Ainsty and Somerton and Frome were up for grabs after a number of MPs quit in solidarity with Boris Johnson. So Labour turned around a 20,000 majority to win Selby. The Lib Dems got 55% of the vote in Frome, but the Tories hung on in Uxbridge due to what I think the visceral hatred of Sadiq Khan's ULEZ charges. So, my question to you is, should the Tories take stock, think about this result, think about what it shows, about what people want, and scrap their own anti-motorist, anti-car green agenda? So, what do we think? Let's start with you, Reem. What do you think? Now, you have been quite an active... you live in Uxbridge and Ruislip.
I do. I live in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, and the Mirror actually came out with an article, well, 2 articles.
They did. I think we actually have it
to
show to our viewers. I don't know if it will appear at some point, but we do. Yes, go on.
So these 2 articles effectively about my views on the NHS, and they called me a top Tory, which I'm most certainly not, and they claimed that my views on the NHS would mean that Hillingdon Hospital, the hospital that I was born in actually, is actually going to be at risk as a result of the Conservatives winning that seat. Now, this is, of course, a completely ludicrous claim. First of all, I don't hold any position in the local Conservative Association.
Yet.
Well, maybe. I also am 20 and I just have started full-time in Westminster. I have no power to change national health policy. So I did find it slightly strange, but it does show how desperate they really were in order to try and claim back some of those votes. And
yeah, absolutely. I was just going to read. It says, yes, exclusive, Uxbridge by-election campaign in chaos as Tory says NHS should be abolished. Reem Ibrahim has repeatedly attacked the health service, which she described as a mistake. So there you go. There was the attempt by the Mirror to, slander Reem.
Not just the Mirror, but Danny Beale also included it in his campaign video.
Well, there you go. Very interesting indeed. Paul, to my question that I'm posing this evening about how the result in Uxbridge, now the Conservatives are deeply unpopular at the moment among large swathes of the electorate for obvious reasons that we've spoken about many times. But this result in Uxbridge does show that ULEZ is a deeply unpopular policy. Does that also show that we're not willing to accept green policies if they cost us too much and the Conservatives and Labour should rethink?
I think that's exactly what it shows, and I think there is a danger from, and I say this as somebody on the Labour side, that we trigger this, what some people have called this green lash, which is a real hostile reaction to the whole kind of race towards net zero, potentially the cliff edge scenario. And this is, by the way, an argument that's been used even by people in the trade union movement, the GMB union, Unite the Union, which represent people in the energy industry, who are worried about this, as I say, this race to net zero, and think that it could result in massive job losses and the erosion of, stable industries where people are employed. Many thousands of their members are employed. And actually, just electorally, is really unpopular. I guess what I would say is, look, we're all in favour of you know, a green environment, but if you're going to penalise motorists in this way, if you're going to try and force people out of their cars, then you've got to have a public transport system worthy of the name. And the reality is, at the moment, we don't. If you look at the railway system, for example, it's falling apart. Our railway system, since privatisation, is completely unreliable. No, it's absolutely true, and the evidence
That's
proves
absolutely
it.
not true.
It's
It's not privatisation.
It's absolutely true that privatisation, even under privatisation,
I'll let you come back after Paul's finished.
Even under privatisation, the private rail companies have been hugely subsidised by government and by the taxpayer, and actually the system is still unreliable, and it is still fragmented, and it is still dirty, and it is still expensive. So what we need to do, one of the things we need to do is renationalise the railways, invest properly in the railway system. Very popular policy.
And then we won't need cars, is that your point?
And if we invest properly and actually make it a proper effective service and a proper integrated system that people, and a cheap system that people can use, then we may not need to force people into their cars, and we may not need to levy these sorts of things.
But the thing is, I don't think
to be a holistic approach.
I don't think people are being forced into their cars. I think they quite like driving them. I mean, it gives you the freedom to stop when you like, to change direction, change destination,
to sit in traffic for 3 hours.
Yeah, it's not great in city centres, of course it's not, and it's not great in the southeast in particular. I'm sure across most of the country there are many a traffic jam, but I do think there's something, you know, freeing about being able to get into your car. Reem, so there are lots of green policies that will cost people. So we've got gas boilers. New gas boilers. Should we have a ban on those? Currently, I believe there is one scheduled for 2025, which is very soon indeed. There's also the ban on new diesel and petrol cars being sold in the UK from 2030. Do you think this ULEZ result here, which is what it is in Uxbridge, shows that perhaps those kind of policies need to be rethought?
Oh, absolutely. And then at the moment we've got the Green Energy Levy, which effectively means that the government are increasing artificially the prices of energy bills and then also subsidising it with the energy price guarantee. I mean, some of these policies really do feel quite ludicrous indeed. When we're thinking about why environmental policies aren't actually popular with the sort of core green conservative vote, really it's as a result of the fact that these policies are making them poorer. ULEZ is a £12.50 effectively extra tax on your ability to drive your car in that zone. Uxbridge and South Ruislip was going to then be that area that was going to be expanded to. It's expanded to the rest of the M25. Of course, it's unpopular. We're not just thinking about, you know, the poor and the vulnerable, but actually those that are car-bound, those that are disabled, that have to drive to get to places.
And it's worth, of course, noting that Sadiq Khan would say that this is a necessary measure in order to cut back on pollution and to save lives and to stop the rates of asthma, for example, among children. That is his justification for this policy. Others, of course, have pointed out that it may well be a money-grabbing scheme, but I believe we have an image to show which shows us that this is not just a London issue, this ULEZ scheme. Across the country, there are various low-emission schemes. As you can see from everywhere, from Southampton to Aberdeen, we have some kind of scheme in order to which essentially charges drivers for polluting. So this is widespread across the United Kingdom. Now, of course, the Conservatives only managed to cling on to this constituency by the skin of their teeth. I think it was by about 500 votes. So it wasn't, you know, a roaring a win, but Labour were very much wanting to get this one. Do you think that this actually comes down to more than just ULEZ, or is this just the way they're going to have to, or is this just in this instance, if you know what I mean?
I think this result in Uxbridge was clearly about ULEZ, and I think the proof of that is that the Tory victor made that point himself in all of his kind of post-election, post-announcement interviews. He made it very clear that this was a kickback from the constituency against Sadiq Khan. The interesting thing about that, by the way, is I suspect that people in Conservative central office were not best pleased about that, because of course what they would have liked, I think, is for the Tory candidate Tuckwell to have come out and said, yes, this is an endorsement of Rishi Sunak. You know, this is clearly showing that the next election is far from done. Rishi is making inroads in terms of the recent inflation announcement, with inflation going down and the migration bill going through. And instead, all of his interviews were specifically about ULEZ. So that really
That's a very good point, Paul.
That was manna from heaven for Labour, because it allowed them to say, well, of course, you know, this is not representative of a national picture. This is about ULEZ. And you know what? The Tory candidate himself has said that. I think that was
it's a by-election, right? They of course, they're going to campaign on local issues. And I'm sorry, I think the CCHQ were pretty happy about the fact that they won the seat in the first place.
Well, of course.
And then actually Steve, you know, ran a very effective campaign because he was actually able to then sort of talk about local issues that were important to residents. He was born in Hillingdon Hospital, for example.
But it doesn't reflect on Rishi Sunak. I think that was Paul's point. But it's quite interesting because the Labour deputy leader, Angela Rayner, who always has a lot to say, she even admitted that the ULEZ policy cost her party the by-election. She said there needs to be a rethink. And she said it is unaffordable for many Londoners and penalises them without more of a scrappage scheme. Reem, would you support this policy around the country if there were more scrappage schemes funded by the taxpayer?
I would absolutely support scrapping ULEZ. It wouldn't necessarily be funded by the taxpayer. What I want is actually these policies to be rolled back, Emily.
Well, there you go. And you? More scrappage schemes?
I don't like cars. We're a small island. I don't think we're an island that's actually made for huge numbers, millions of cars on our roads. I would much rather see a society where we had public transport as a viable, realistic, clean, safe and cheap alternative. But the truth is we don't have that alternative at the moment, and therefore I think to penalise people through using their cars, when for many of them it's the only medium of transport that they've got, is probably unfair. So I would be in favour of scrapping it, but then investing properly in public services, renationalise the railways, have a good public bus system
More
as well,
taxpayer
and
money
get people
being spent.
out of their cars.
Ah, how
get them
wonderful.
onto public
Well,
transport.
you know, the solution to all of your problems seems to be throwing more taxpayer money at every single problem in this country.
Let's look, Reen, at the privatisations that have taken place, by and large, which have been an unmitigated disaster. Let's look at water. What are the water companies doing, apart from running down the service, polluting our rivers, creating an enormous amount of defects and leaks, and actually making a huge amount of profit into the bargain?
You're absolutely right that Thames Water, for example, a government-created monopoly, has not actually acted effectively. They've done some terrible things, for example, with sort of polluting with sewage and that kind of thing. But actually, again, that was a government-created monopoly. If government were to stay out of water companies, were actually stay out of rails, for example, let's talk about transport, this is the point that you're trying to make here. The government still pick which private companies are actually getting those contracts for those legs. The government chose, for example, that Avanti West Coast would get the leg between London and Manchester. The reason why these companies aren't effective is because the basic principles of the market, competition and failure, do not happen. These companies can't fail because the government pick them.
Well, look, the truth is that there's probably no area, tell me if I'm wrong, there's probably no area of the economy or our public infrastructure that you would not privatise, true or false?
No area of the public sector. Of course there are. I mean, look at the military. Education, for example. I believe Milton Friedman's educational vouchers.
So you know, the logic of the position of saying that we should have water privatised, which is, you know, an essential public good, and clearly the public is always going to need water. Society can't function without it. And similar with the railway system.
Similar with food, but we have privatised supermarkets.
The principles that you would apply to say, actually, privatisation there drives up efficiency, drives up productivity. What logic then says to you, well, actually, we shouldn't apply it to the military or to the police force? Why not? Why not have the police force sponsored by Shell or Enron?
Water is
like
one of those public goods, public services, whatever you want to call it. That is probably there is the strongest argument for it to be publicly owned.
Then what? Right.
But energy, for example, which was what Jeremy Corbyn wanted to nationalise and Keir Starmer wanted to nationalise until very recently. Thrives off competition. We need competition in our energy system, and I would argue a little more competition probably in our health service wouldn't go amiss. But let's have a look at what people at home are saying, because we could have the nationalisation versus privatisation discussion forever. What would you at home privatise? What would you nationalise? Let me know. Anyway, should we nationalise housing? just have all housing nationalised, all social housing. On the result in Uxbridge and what this means for green policies, Alan says, I never thought I would thank Sadiq Khan for anything, but I do for the Uxbridge by-election result. Rishi Sunak is living in cuckoo land if he believes this was anything but a hollow victory. Darren says, if it's about pollution, then ban the vehicles. The charge is a tax, a money grab, and another barely disguised attack on the freedom of movement. Well, yes, I do think so too. And John, just finally, the people have spoken. Time for Khan and ULEZ to go. Why did those gullible Londoners vote for him? They let the cat out of the bag for a potential national ULEZ disaster. Well, a lot of strong feeling. Please do keep getting in touch with me on that and everything else we're going to be discussing. Coming up, should the royal family be tightening their belts? The rest of us are. A 45% increase in the royal grant would suggest otherwise.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs Co with me, Emily Carver. Keeping me company until 7 o'clock is Communications Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Reem Ibrahim, and writer, broadcaster and firefighter, Paul Embry. Now, I am loving the debate in my inbox that is coming through. Rob says, Paul Embry for Prime Minister. I would vote Labour if he was in charge. But then Ben has come on. He says, I have been listening to Paul, who says he really does not like cars. Maybe he would like the country to go back to the horse and cart. Yes, you are starting to sound like a bit of an eco-maniac. Paul, with all this anti-car nonsense. Michael says, I find the idea of scrapping all cars ridiculous. Try living here in Dorset without a car. Buses are rarer than hen's teeth and non-existent on Sundays. But in Paul Embry's Britain, there would be buses, you know, just picking you up. Just taking
I'm winning you over, Emily.
They'd be picking you up, taking you wherever you like to go at any hour. It'd be fantastic. All paid for by
the taxpayer. I wonder how much it's going to cost the government to actually buy up transport.
Anyway, we are going to be getting on to the royal family in just one moment, but I want to know what my panel think about this 25-year-old Labour MP that has just won his seat in Selby and Ainsty, because I was having this debate earlier with Tom Harwood, and I was of the view that 25 is absolutely far too young. But Reem, you are 20 years old. You've achieved quite a lot by that age. You are here on my panel, which must be the career highlight. So far. So what do you think? 25, too young?
I don't think it is, and again, maybe I am just being biased here, but I think that as a 25-year-old who has, you know, studied at Oxford, I believe he did study at Oxford, he, you know, is very well educated, he clearly understands, you know, sort of how to win an election, he's done very well for himself. Now, despite him, I think sort of my only sort of accusation against him would probably be that he's a Labour MP rather than anything else. But no, I think his age is perfectly fine, and there are many 40-year-olds that probably know less than him.
Well, you say, oh, he's very well educated. Yes, he is very well educated. He went to Oxford University. But, Paul, do we have too many of these types that go and study, I think he did history and politics or something like this at Oxford. He then went into... he went and worked for Wes Streeting as a parliamentary researcher. He's the Shadow Health Secretary. He did a bit of work with a public affairs agency, CBI as well. He's done... you know, the sort of usual career politician-type jobs. Is that what we want in the House of Commons? Is that what we need more of? And does his age bother you? A few questions.
His age does bother me, actually. I think that and it concerns me that as a society we've got this tendency these days to kind of believe that young people are imbued with, you know, infinite wisdom and they can teach the rest of us about life and everything else. And in doing so, we often kind of reject people with more experience, people who have raised families, people who have paid mortgages, people who may have been unemployed, people who have had kids and whatever. And we say, no, actually, those people are gammon. Those people have got nothing to teach us. And thank God, you know, most of them will be dying off soon. You certainly saw that in the Brexit debate. That was the tenor of the debate in the Brexit debate. So, you know, and the truth is that often young people have not got the life experience that older people have got. So it does slightly concern me that we do kind of attribute these great powers of wisdom to them. I do think we have too many people from that kind of conveyor belt of, you know, Oxford graduate, worked for a think tank or a charity or parliamentary researcher or public relations, and then very quickly they're into Parliament. Because again, if you purport to represent people from ordinary backgrounds and you've never experienced life in an ordinary background, then you're probably not the person sort of best placed to do it. Labour particularly has a problem with this because when you think of Labour's history and its links to the trade union movement and the number of MPs who once upon a time had come up through the trade union movement, had done ordinary jobs, you know, had worked in mines and shipyards and stuff like that. Been a firefighter, which is why they won't have me. But you think of people who had come from those backgrounds and had become Labour MPs. Labour has got far too many people who have come from the type of background that this new guy, and, you know, I genuinely wish him well, but, you know, if Labour is serious about broadening its appeal and about reconnecting with red wall areas, then frankly having a phalanx of people, Uxbridge graduates who have worked in public relations and worked for shadow cabinet ministers is not the way to go.
Yeah, Reem, was the Veterans Minister, Johnny Mercer, were his remarks a little bit harsh? He said he looked like something, well, they compared him to an in-betweener. Now, if you don't know the In-Betweeners, it's a silly sitcom-style show about four geeky teenagers who try to, you know, find girls and things, and they always get into a mess.
I actually went to the school where the In-Betweeners was filmed, fun fact.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. Well,
Uxbridge and Ruislip?
It was in Uxbridge and South Ruislip. It was filmed in that wonderful constituency.
Private school, obviously.
No, it's a state school, of course.
So you can favour
I
of...
went to a state school, thank you, Paul.
Surely against
Don't
state
assume-
education should be privatised.
Well, I
Privatised
the
Uxbridge
benefits of the
State
state.
Just
Comprehensive.
because she's working in Westminster in a think tank does not mean she necessarily was privately educated.
I went to a state school. Look, maybe a requirement to be an MP is that you've got to have done at least one shift at a pub. That makes you a normal person.
Well, I made the point, only half in jest, that actually the Labour Party should have a requirement that if you are a candidate as an MP for the Labour Party, you should have worked 2 years on the minimum wage in an average job, preferably manual labour, working in a warehouse or an office, a call centre, something like that.
But then you just have these posh guys and girls who are doing a shift in a factory just so they can get on the list. I mean, why not? I mean, it's an improvement, perhaps. Anyway, let's move on to something completely different. Is King Charles ripping us off? He is due to get a 45% increase, which is quite well, it's significant, in his royal stipend by 2025. Now, during a cost of living crisis, is this the best look really for the monarchy? But if the Crown Estates are doing well, this is the alternative view, and our sovereign is busy at work, is it something we should really bother about? Everyone needs an income, don't they, Reem?
Everyone does need an income. Of course, the king is a very important part of our British tradition and our history. The monarch as an institution, I think, is something that is incredibly valuable. I mean, 45% definitely not in line with inflation. It's more than what the unions are asking for, at least anyway, and that's really saying something. I think that when we're thinking about the sort of economic impact that the monarchy has overall, we've got to remember, of course, the sort of impact they have on tourism, which is incredible. Also, I mean, the Crown Estate, thanks to one of the kings that didn't want to sort of have this deal with the Prime Minister, effectively all the profits from the Crown Estate does go to the Treasury, which is spent on public services. So the argument against any kind of pay rise for the king would be based on the idea that we need more money for public services, which I, of course, think we do not need that money for.
Well, there we go. Cut the public services, and you're quite relaxed with money going to the royal family because you believe that they probably, on balance, bring in far more to our country in terms of national pride, tourism, etc., etc. Mark, however, I did put to our viewers and listeners, what would you privatise, what would you nationalise? Mark said, privatise the royal family. Paul, is that one privatisation you'd agree with?
Well, I'm scrapping it rather than privatising it actually would be a better thing.
You are squeaking like Billy-O on that chair.
I know, we're going to need to change it, Julie, but I might grab your one instead. I think the optics are terrible. We're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. People are really struggling to make ends meet. You've got interest rates going up and people are going to be really finding it difficult to pay their mortgages. You've got real wages that are falling year on year. And whatever the kind of technical arguments for how the Crown and the monarchy is funded, and whatever justification can be made for that, the reality is that people out there are going to see that as one rule for them and one rule for everybody else. And I think it's going to play into the arguments that people often recite with justification, in my view, that the royal family is too bloated, actually. You know, there are probably too many properties, there are probably too many hangers-on. And if we're going to have a royal family, and I would be in favour of a republic personally, I think we should be allowed to elect our head of state like other grown-up countries do. But if we are going to have a royal family, at least bring it into line with some of the European monarchies, places like Norway, Denmark, Sweden, where they are much more streamlined. I think
that is true. A lot of European monarchies are much more streamlined and they do cost the taxpayer, cost the country far less. But I would say that we are special in Britain and perhaps we merit a more expensive monarchy. I don't know if that's a popular opinion. Who knows? I'm just throwing it out there. But it's quite interesting how royal funding is decided. It's tied to the profits, to a percentage of the profits of the Crown Estate. Now, it is 25%, I believe, at the moment. It is dropping to 12%, but because the Crown Estate has been making higher profits, it will increase that number quite dramatically. And this is because, for example, the Crown Estate is allowing land to be used for wind turbines and the like. They're leasing out land and they're making a profit off it. And they say, the Buckingham Palace spokesperson says that the sovereign grant has remained flat at 86 million for several years, which he said was a real terms cut. So there you go, considered against inflation. We're all having to squeeze. We're all having to squeeze our belts.
Get them out on a picket line.
She also said that the increase that is due, that is coming down the road in 2025, will be spent on renovating and improving Buckingham Palace. So there you go.
There you go. I do think it's interesting that they've actually said that it's the real terms pay cut. That's quite funny. I think we've got to remember that 25% is what the royal family receive. If we were to privatise or abolish, as you say, the royal family, the Crown estate would still be there. So we wouldn't be able to build wind turbines on it that are publicly funded. We wouldn't be able to do many of the things that we do with the Crown estate, and all of that money would no longer go to the Treasury. So technically, we don't actually pay anything as taxpayers.
Well, I could talk about this all day, and we'll come to your views in just a moment, but we're going to have a quick look at the weather.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Damp and breezy for many of us this weekend, particularly during Saturday, feeling cool under the rain, but signs of something a little brighter for many, albeit not for all, by Sunday. Weather fronts are streaming in from the west. They are now thickening up the cloud for many places, bringing spells of rain overnight to Northern Ireland, into western Scotland, northwest England, as well as much of North Wales. Dribs and drabs of rainfall for South Wales, southwest England, staying dry and clear for the southeast of England, although with the breeze picking up, a lot of cloud cover, it's a mild night for many. The one exception, northern Scotland, mid-single figures here, with some sunshine first thing. And actually, if you're after sunshine this weekend, northern Scotland's the place to be. 1 or 2 showers for Shetland, as well as Orkney. The odd shower for Aberdeenshire, but otherwise northern Scotland fine. Southeast England starts fine before some light rain arrives by the afternoon. It's outbreaks of rain widely elsewhere. A strengthening breeze, unseasonable conditions really, especially towards the southwest and west. Into Sunday, it stays breezy in the south, especially around coasts, but brighter skies eventually appear with quite a number of showers in the south. This area of rain across northern England will persist, and that's likely to lead to large rainfall totals. By Monday, that's sinking away, replaced by showers.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Yes, coming up, rents are up 33%. Teenagers' main source of news is now TikTok. Should we be worried? And China has infiltrated all aspects of British life. Benign force or a threat to democracy? All of that to come.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs Co with me, Emily Carver. Keeping me company until 7 o'clock is Communications Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Reem Ibrahim, and writer, broadcaster and firefighter Paul Embry. Now, we've been told that people at home are enjoying this duo. I am very much enjoying this duo, so we've got some fizz to enjoy, to celebrate the fabulous duo, because apparently you debate without any beastliness.
Paul and I love each other very much.
No beastliness, which is very nice.
That many years.
Have a little sip. Now, anyway, before the break, we were talking about King Charles. He's going to be having more money spent on King Charles. Well, he's getting to keep more of the profits from the Crown Estate. And if we did scrap the royal family, as Paul Embry has suggested we might, that money, the Crown Estate, would go back into public ownership as we fundamentally own it. So that money could be spent on public services, in theory, anyway. But Jennifer has said, if we can summon up at least £6 million each day to keep migrants in the UK, I think you're talking about hotel accommodation there, surely the amount of cash the King gets is well worth it. Ruth says, Charles is an old man who has no idea how normal people live and the struggles they have to make ends meet. Yes, you're probably right with that one. I think there's more debate because it's King Charles. I think people were quite happy for the Queen to be receiving so much money. Richard says, build a new green housing estate in Windsor Park with an immigration processing centre, plenty of room for it. We seem to be coming back to the amount of money we're currently spending on people who have crossed the Channel, but it's a fair point, to be fair. Now, moving on, private rents in Britain have reached all-time highs. The average amount outside London has risen by a third in 4 years. That is quite incredible. Despite the hike, homes are being quickly let, with landlords facing long queues of hopeful tenants. Demand far exceeds supply in many areas, leading to higher prices, worsened then by landlords passing on higher costs due to increased interest rates on their own mortgages. So, is this just how the free market works? Is it a free market, or are we being ripped off? Paul?
Well, it's not very free, is it, for the many families who are living in bed and breakfast accommodation. It's not very free for the millions of people who are paying extortionate rents. Those people are not benefiting particularly from the free market, so far as I can see. When you look at the average cost of rent outside London, £1,200 per calendar month. If you look at the average cost in the capital, double that. Which I think is a scandalous amount of money. And the truth is that we have got a chronic shortage of housing in this country, and millions of people are suffering as a result of it. And the thing that we should do, and we should have done it years ago, and we should do it now, is a massive programme of social housing, building social housing.
Thought you'd say that, Paul.
Well, and it works. I mean, if you look at the post-war Attlee government, one of the best things that government did was to, because, you know, prior to then, you look at the 20s and 30s, people have been living in slum accommodation. In sanitary conditions, and it had all sorts of impacts in terms of people's health and well-being and so on. And that government had a massive building of council housing, which allowed families to live in decent accommodation that wasn't infested with disease and mould and whatever. And given the shortage we've got at the moment, and given the prices that people are paying, and given the fact that people are living in substandard accommodation, and are very much at the mercy of, in some cases, parasitical landlords, not all of them, but some of them, there is, I think, an incontestable case to say that we need to spend whatever is necessary to give people decent accommodation, because once you get that, you then reduce demand, and then you get the prices coming down, whether it's people buying homes or people renting homes. And this seems to me to be a no-brainer.
This is a problem. People often talk, because our media is quite London-centric a lot of the time, talk about London rents pushing people out of the city, talking about how high they are. Karen's been on. She says, I live in Stockport in a 2-up, 2-down mid-terraced house built in 1800. In 2019, I was paying £550. In 2020, it went up to £675. In August last year, it went up to £995. One more increase and I'll be living in a tent.
That's awful. I mean, I think it's interesting that Paul sort of seems to think that social housing is somehow the way forward. We've got to remember that the housing system is not a free market system. The government are actively restricting the supply of housing, which effectively means, I mean, it's economics 101. If you increase the supply of something, prices will go down. We shouldn't be trying to reduce demand. We should be trying to increase supply to actually supply that demand. And unfortunately, the government seems to be actively restricting house building. We've got to build more homes. That is the only way out of the housing crisis.
Well, yes, indeed. We will come back to that coming up next. And I'm getting lots of views in from you at home who've experienced these rental price increases. I can't quite believe that Karen's in Stockport has gone up from £550 to £995 just since 2019. So 4 years ago, almost doubled. That is quite incredible. I imagine you'll have to move if it goes up any further, unless your income goes up one way or another. That is really quite incredible, and we've seen similar across the country. But teenagers are now mainly getting their news from TikTok. Is this something we should be worried about? I'm a little worried.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On Mark Dolan tonight, my first reaction to yesterday's by-election results. No clear winner. It's all to play for in a year's time. Reaction from TV news legend John Sargent and the leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton. It might take a 10. The cancellation of Nigel Farage's bank account is a war on free speech, a war on British values and a war on the people. Plus my top pundits and tomorrow's papers. We're live from 9.
Yes, welcome back to Dewbs Co with me, Emily Carver. Keeping me company still is Reem Ibrahim from the Institute of Economic Affairs and Paul Embry, writer, broadcaster and firefighter. Now, a lot of you have been making the point at home, you've been writing in and making the point that the only way to sort the housing problem is to stop mass immigration. And I do think that is a good point to make. So the population has increased rapidly. Ergo, we have difficulty housing this many people when the population grows. Reem, you would say, well, if we just have planning reform, we can house them all.
I absolutely agree. And also, I mean, the demand is always going to go up, so we should be increasing supply, not trying to reduce demand.
But Clive says, as long as we import 500,000 plus people into the UK each year, we are never going to build enough and prices and rents will continue to rise well above inflation rate. Is mass immigration making us poorer because it's pushing up rents?
Well, it's a factor. There's no question about that, but it isn't the only factor. And I think that when you've got a situation where you have, as I said prior to the break, millions of families who can't get into decent, affordable accommodation, then frankly, I think the only answer, or certainly the most practical answer, is the intervention of the state. And the intervention of the state to say, this is clearly a chronic problem, and we have to intervene as a government to make sure we provide houses, cheap and affordable houses, decent houses for people, just as we did after the war. There's no reason why we couldn't do that again.
I just wonder where all this money's going to come from, though, Paul. You know, the Labour Party, they've already backtracked on all of their public spending, it seems. It seems to be a consensus that we've run out. And, of course, debt is at 100% of GDP at the moment, and there's not enough money to go around, it seems. But you would say tax the rich.
I'm a subscriber to the John Maynard Keynes School of Thought, who said that anything we can actually do, we can afford. And it's absolutely true. We're a currency-issuing sovereign nation. We can't run out of money. We can't go bankrupt. And
we might not be allowed to borrow if we spend too much willy-nilly.
Isn't it funny that when it comes to any military escapade, like invading Iraq or bailing out the banks or COVID or whatever, we can suddenly find billions of pounds down the back of the sofa in a time of need?
Well, public
isn't it a time of need when you've got millions of families in substandard housing?
46% of GDP. That is ridiculous. We spend far too much. The size of the state is incredibly bloated.
Do you know what? I think this is something that will divide the nation, whether we're spending too much or too little on our public services. But we must move on, because the Chinese-owned social media giant TikTok is now the UK's most popular news source for 12 to 15-year-olds. The mobile app allows users to create and share videos on any topic, including the news. Do any of you watch TikTok? Are you turning off GB News for the social media giant? Or perhaps you're watching GB News highlights on TikTok. If you do, you might have seen my post explaining the story earlier. Take a look. TikTok, the biggest single news source for teenagers in this country. We'll be looking at that tonight on Dewbs Co. I'm covering Michelle Dewberry on GB News this evening from 6. But what actually is TikTok? Well, it's a social media platform that focuses on entertainment, fun videos, but also now news. News is everywhere on TikTok, and there are big questions about whether there can be propaganda at play, what children are seeing, whether they can rely on the news sources they're seeing on TikTok. Do you think it's a good thing that teenagers are receiving their news in this way? Let me know tonight on Dewbs Co. Well, there you go. I'm not sure I have a career as a TikTok star, but I do know one TikTok star, and she happens to be sat next to me in the shape and form of Reem Ibrahim. Reem, you think TikTok is a fantastic resource and children should be using it and we don't need to worry about it?
I do think we don't need to worry about it. I do think TikTok is fantastic, and I think that the fact that children or teenagers are getting the news full stop is a positive thing. The fact that young people are engaging in these ideas, I think is a positive thing. We do need to think about the precautions here. Now, unfortunately, TikTok politics especially is incredibly inundated by leftist ideas. And there aren't many of us right-wingers on TikTok, unfortunately, and a lot of the time those kind of ideas tend to be suppressed in the algorithm. Now, for our viewers that don't know, the way that the TikTok algorithm works is that effectively it tries and takes the things that you already like. So if you're already a leftist or you already like some socialist ideas, then it will spit back at you those exact same ideas. It's sort of like an echo echo chamber. That's something to worry about, and I think we need to try and diversify that, get more right-wing people on TikTok.
So if I liked, are you worried about this sort of political indoctrination through news coverage on TikTok, whereby you like one lefty video and then you get bombarded by it? So in your case, as you are a bit left-wing, let's say they got bombarded by Ream's free marketeer content, and then suddenly they become a mad libertarian.
I have to say I was worried about it until Ream said it's infested with socialist ideas, and then I thought, actually, I'll give it a fair win.
But also a lot of woke ideas.
OK, well, that I wouldn't be so keen on. But I think, I mean, in all seriousness, I think with these social media sites and kids using them, it has become, I think, for many kids, a bit of a drug. And I think it's, you know, it's a dangerous drug, potentially. And if we, in any other walk of life, if kids are indulging in dangerous drugs, then we tend to licence it and we tend to take action. And I think with this, I think it's something that probably does need a little bit of regulation. I'd like to see the tech companies voluntarily place time limits on how long individual kids can spend on their sites.
I think that's not a bad idea, time limits, but perhaps that should be down to the parents. Let me know what you think. But that, unfortunately, is all we've got time for. It's been a fantastic show. I've really enjoyed myself this evening. Lovely glass of Prosecco to finish. I hope you're having a lovely time at home. I believe we now have Lee Anderson in just one moment. He's got a rip-roarer of a show coming up, as always. Do stay tuned for that and have an absolutely lovely weekend. I'm off for a whole week.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Damp and breezy for many of us this weekend, particularly during Saturday, feeling cool under the rain, but signs of something a little brighter for many, albeit not for all, by Sunday. Weather fronts are streaming in from the west. They are now thickening up the cloud for many places, bringing spells of rain overnight to Northern Ireland, into western Scotland, northwest England, as well as much of North Wales. Dribs and drabs of rainfall for South Wales, southwest England, staying dry and clear for the southeast of England, although with the breeze picking up, a lot of cloud cover, it's a mild night for many. The one exception, northern Scotland, mid-single figures here, with some sunshine first thing. And actually, if you're after sunshine this weekend, northern Scotland's the place to be. 1 or 2 showers for Shetland, as well as Orkney. The odd shower for Aberdeenshire, but otherwise northern Scotland fine. Southeast England starts fine before some light rain arrives by the afternoon. It's outbreaks of rain widely elsewhere. A strengthening breeze, unseasonable conditions really, especially towards the southwest and west. Into Sunday, it stays breezy in the south, especially around coasts, but brighter skies eventually appear with quite a number of showers in the south. This area of rain across northern England will persist, and that's likely to lead to large rainfall totals. By Monday, that's sinking away.